Hello everyone, my name is PJ and welcome to The Void, continuing with Crash Bandicoot season, but first, a bit of trivia. When the original Crash Bandicoot was being developed, Crash was originally a character named Willy Wombat, but they changed him into a Bandicoot pretty quick. I guess Naughty Dog realized that the name wasn't creative enough because 1 year later, a game called Willy Wombat was released for the Sega Saturn, and there was a character named Willy Wombat in Tasmania. So it's a good thing they changed it. Also, did you know that Crash is actually the name of a genus of Bandicoot species? So Crash Bandicoots actually exist in real life. Look it up. Anyway, let's get this show on the road.
Brace yourself for Crash Nitro Kart!
Following in the success of CTR, it makes sense that so many Crash sequels would also be kart racers. This one was also
developed by Vicarious Visions.
And as a subtle nod to themselves, the letter V is spread all over the game. Of course, this is because the main villain's name starts with V, but we all know what the devs wanted us to think of. The story begins with Crash, Coco, Crunch, Cortex, N. Gin, and Tiny being abducted and whisked away to a coliseum in space, where Emperor Velo the 27th forces them to participate in the Galactic Racing Championship, and if they refuse, their planet will be destroyed. Apparently, Velo heard about Crash and his friends from Oxide, who is also in this game and participates as a regular, non-cheating racer this time, alongside his two teammates Zam and Zem, who have no personalities or importance to the story whatsoever. Also, N-Trance is here for some reason, and he's brainwashed Polar and Dingodile into being on his team just so they can be in the game. And by now you're probably wondering what I mean by teams. Well, in Crash Nitro Kart, the racers work together in one of four teams. There's Team Bandicoot, Team Cortex, Team Trance, and Team Oxide. In every race, 2 members from each team participate for a total of 8 racers. When you drive near your teammate, a gauge begins to fill up, and when it's full, you can activate a special bonus where you are given infinite power-ups for a limited time. Oh my god, they actually turned the boss's ability to cheat into a game mechanic. But the bosses still cheat. Not as bad as before though. Also, if the other member of your team wins, you win as well. Which is exactly how it should be. For being the only console racing game in the series without the word team in the title, this is the game that features teamwork as a mechanic the most. When you play Adventure Mode, you can only choose either Team Bandicoot or Team Cortex. Trance and Oxide are only available in Arcade or Versus Mode. Unlike CTR, where you're stuck with just one character the whole game, this one has you picking a team, and you can switch between its members whenever you want. Each team has one of 3 classes: Speed, Balanced, and Acceleration. No turning, because it sucked. Hey, Future PJ here. I can't believe it took me this fucking long to notice this, but Coco's class is not acceleration. It's turning. They don't have acceleration available as an option in Adventure Mode. Then they changed Coco's class from CTR. My god, why? Strangely, these classes are marked as Beginner for Acceleration, Intermediate for Balanced, and Advanced for Speed. What does Beginner mean in this case? Is it a beginner class because it's easy to play but sucks overall? Or is it so overpowered that you'll beat the game easily and is thus for beginners? Well, I'll tell you that I crushed the entire story mode with this beginner class, so you be the judge. Other than what I've mentioned, CNK is identical to CTR in terms of gameplay and progression, although it doesn't have as many tracks. You beat tracks to earn trophies, beat bosses to earn keys which unlock new hubs, get all the keys to face the final boss and get a fake ending, then get all the time relics to get the true ending. The tracks in this game were somewhat revolutionary for kart racers in that parts of them have you driving vertically, upside down, or in loops in anti-gravity sections. These can affect gameplay slightly in terms of weapon aiming, but not as much as the geometry. Making the anti-gravity work comes at the cost of clumsy controls when driving on them. The game also has a very helpful gauge that's displayed right next to your car that tells you when the best time to power slide is, and this is when I finally started learning how to do it right. How power sliding works is you press and hold either L1 or R1 to hop, whichever you're comfortable with, make a hard turn midair, and you'll start drifting, leaving a trail of asphalt behind you. While doing this, the gauge will fill up. If it fills up all the way, the power slide will end, so when it gets in the red, you have to press the opposite shoulder button than what you used to hop. You'll get a slight boost of speed and the gauge will reset. If you successfully do this thrice in a row without crashing or getting interrupted, you will receive a larger speed boost that lasts longer, and then you can repeat the process with another hop to get faster and faster. There are other mechanics involved like reserves and fire levels that I hadn't learned yet, so I'll get into those when the time comes. Aku and Uka still talk to you and tell you the game's controls, but their acting and animations are somehow even more uncanny than before.
You will have to race in order to win the Galaxy Circuit and go home. To compete in a race, drive onto a warp pad with a vortex on it.
Also, Uka and Cortex are both still voiced by Clancy Brown at this point, and it wasn't until this game that I realized who else Brown plays.
You will have to race in order to win the Galaxy Circuit and save Earth for us to conquer. To compete in a race, drive onto a warp pad with a vortex on it. Finish the race in first place to win a trophy. Collect trophies to create additional vortexes to more tracks. Drive fast and don't fail me.
Sound familiar? Coco is still voiced by Debbie Derryberry, and she does a much better job here than she did in Wrath. Unfortunately, whoever wrote her lines is a complete tool, so if you enjoy playing as Coco, be prepared to hear the following relics from the early 2000s.
Rockstar! Suckstar!
For some reason, Tiny Tiger is really adorable in this game, like a brutish child.
Tiny go fast! Tiny play!
Look at him shake his leg when Geary vacuums his dummy. Crunch is voiced once again by Kevin Michael Richardson, but he seems to have a wildly different personality than before. I guess this is unbrainwashed Crunch.
I've heard you can lose a lot of weight on it.
But you can't keep it off. Just eat less and exercise more.
And then there's Emperor Velo, whose performance is amazing. He's voiced by Steve Blum, who you may know as Spike from Cowboy Bebop, Orochimaru from Naruto, Jamie from Megas XOR, Vincent Valentine from FF7. How do they keep getting such big-name celebrities?
You now have all 4 champion keys. And with these, you can now challenge the most accomplished racer in the entire galaxy. Me. And I never lose.
The bosses in this game are all original characters. The first is Krunk from Terra, a planet that is for some reason a copy of Earth. They even have a temple dedicated to Tiny. Interesting. Second is Nash from Baron, a weird cyborg shark who's programmed to always go fast. Third is Norm from Phenomena, a weird elven mime who can split himself in 2. So this boss is against 2 racers. Pretty cool. And the fourth is Geary from Techni, who really reminds me of the movie Robots that came out 2 years later. He even makes the same stupid back of my hand joke from that movie.
Just stick with me, kid. I know this town like the back of my hand. Hey, that's new.
I know Techni like the back of my hand. It's dirty.
The final boss is, of course, Emperor Velo, the galactic champion, who apparently needs to be assisted by 2 nameless lackeys. The cutscenes in the game are almost completely different depending on which team you pick, so even the story mode has replayability. In both endings, it is revealed that the Velo we see is actually just a robot body, controlled by a normal member of his race, the real Velo, who was also an unlockable character. In the Bandicoot story, the main characters end up making friends with all the bosses. Coco reprograms Nash and finally gives him a chance to rest. Crash gives Krunk his yo-yo as a sign of goodwill. Norm is a good sport about losing, and Crash even gives the empire he'd won back to Velo. It's all really cute, I love it. Team Cortex, on the other hand, antagonizes everyone. Cortex even threatens to take over Terra once he's done the same with Earth.
Just do not make trouble.
Trouble? I won't make trouble. At least not until I've conquered my planet first.
In Cortex's ending, he uses Velo's scepter to try and return to Earth, but accidentally ends up on Terra in the distant past. Here, the natives see Tiny and start worshipping him like a god, which is how Tiny Temple gets built. So, wait, Tiny Temple is there in both story modes, but it can't exist unless Cortex wins and goes back in time. So, Cortex is the canon winner of this tournament? Whatever. Well, that is pretty cool. The Crash Racing games all take place in a separate canon anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much in the end. Speaking of ends, I didn't get either of this game's true endings on my own. To do so, you need to get all the time relics, right? Well, I tried. I really tried. But my skill level at this point in my Crash career was still way too low. I couldn't get a single relic. Not even a sapphire one. But I did get a lot of much needed practice with the power sliding, an important stepping stone in my quest to get... Actually, we'll talk about that later. Oh, and I never covered the game's music, did I? Really, the OST's level of quality and memorability is even less than that of CTR's for me. There's 2 or 3 great songs, and the rest are just kinda meh. The best ones are Out of Time and Clockwork Wampa. My overall thoughts on the game? Well, I definitely enjoyed it more than the original CTR. I liked the more visible gauge for power sliding, I liked the stronger focus on story, I like half of the new characters they introduced, the tracks were more fun, especially the hyperspaceway where you're going through portals to take you to different sections of the track, and the teamwork mechanic was cool. There's a lot to love here, but not enough for me to put in the time and effort needed to complete it, which for Crash games is the only real way to beat them. So I'm giving it a 6 out of 10, but consider it a higher 6 out of 10 than CTR. I really don't want to use decimals. The next game we're going to talk about is Crash Nitro Kart. But wait, didn't we just talk about that? Well, we talked about the home console version. This is the Game Boy Advance version. CNK was the first game in the series to have a simultaneous home console and handheld release. Being on GBA, it uses Mode 7 to simulate the appearance of a 3D environment, like Mario Kart and F-Zero on the Super Nintendo. Because of this, however, the tracks are all completely flat, and there are no anti-grav sections. They all feel kinda samey, but they're made easier to learn by having color-coded sections of the road. It does look and feel really good, all things considered, though there are some gameplay changes. You cannot go in reverse for some reason, and since everything is flat, hopping doesn't get you speed boost as much as before. So getting 10 Wumpa Fruit for that extra speed bonus and maintaining it for the whole race is really important, and really the only thing needed to crush all these races. Power sliding is in the game, but it feels terrible and isn't necessary to use. I never did, and I still beat it. Oh, and the bosses still cheat, but none of them were as hard as Geary. God damn, I was stuck on this guy for over half an hour. And then there was the race against Emperor Velo, who wasn't too difficult, but it was still damn close. I beat him with a difference of only 2/25ths of a second. Also, there are no team mechanics in this version. No gauge that fills, no super power-up time, and you don't win if your teammates win. kind of lame. Why have teams incorporated into the game if there's no teamwork? Although it is nice when your opponents screw each other over, like this really lucky part where Polar was trying to kamikaze me with a TNT crate but ended up taking out Cortex instead. Nice. The characters even have digitized voices, which don't sound completely terrible. It's also impressive how many sprites each character has considering how many there are. All the characters from the console version are here, and while the bosses were not playable in the console version, they are on GBA. But Zem and Zem are not, because they're lame, and they suck. Also unlockable in his very first cameo in a Crash game is Spyro the Dragon. Hey, get used to seeing him. Crash and Spyro have a franchise rivalry, like Sonic and Mario. If you want to unlock him, Entropy, and Oxide early, and you happen to own the GameCube version 2, you can connect the two via link cable and you'll get them all right away. $435 well spent, right? Fake Crash is also unlockable, but the method to do so is really cryptic. I don't know how anyone's supposed to figure this out. In one of the tracks, there is a very subtle break in the tracks that lets you go out of bounds into this huge, wide open space that acts as difficult terrain and slows you down the whole time. Somewhere out here is Fake Crash, and when you find him, you get a cutscene with him talking? Correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the only time he does so, isn't it? Although he's clearly struggling with it. But once you save him, he becomes playable. And rejoice, for he's actually on Team Bandicoot as a good guy. Unlike Spyro, who got himself brainwashed and is on Team Trance, which is why you'll see Uka Uka helping him. The story is virtually identical to the console version. Same bosses, same plot, but the endings are very different. They kind of awkwardly mix the good and bad endings together, so you don't have to get 100% to beat this version? Weird. Also, Velo keeps calling the tournament the Galactic Circus. You mean circuit, right? I think there was a very big miscommunication somewhere. As for the music, it's all GBA remixes of songs from the console version, but unlike the great arrangements from The Huge Adventure and Entranced, these kind of all suck. Many of them are even missing parts of the originals. This version, while not terrible, isn't quite as good as the home version. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 10. So, are we done talking about Crash Nitro Kart yet? No. No, we are not. But the rest of the Nitro Kart series will have to wait for another time. Hold on, stop the music, stop. I am not ready to do a full review of this game. Crash Purple and Spyro Orange are crossover games that came out at the same time in an attempt for each series to promote the other. It wouldn't be right if I talked about one and not the other, or both without having ever talked about Spyro. This is the only game I've played that'll have to be excluded from Crash Bandicoot season. I'm only bringing it up for one reason. These games introduce a new character named Nina Cortex, the niece of Neo Cortex. She just kinda comes out of nowhere, and all the characters act like they know her already. But what's important to note is that this is not the official Nina. She's more like a prototype Nina, an advertisement. She's supposed to be given a proper introduction in the next Crash game, and Crash Purple was supposed to get people hyped for it. A motivation that ultimately fails when you realize how radically different the two versions of her are. Purple's version of Nina is basically just Elmira from Tiny Toons. She loves animals to a Neanderthalistic fault, but only ends up hurting them without meaning to. This demented obsession with animals disappears completely after this game. And for the best, I might add. Nina wouldn't get her true personality until Tag Team Racing. But what about the game in between them? The one meant to properly introduce her. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next major entry in the series. The first canon game we've talked about since Wrath of Cortex, and the first to deviate completely from the standard formula. Crash Twinsanity, also known as Crash Bandicoot 5 in Japan. We'll see how long that lasts. While some people will try to say that this whole game is open world, really it's just the levels that have a more open design. In the first level, you can safely walk to the end in under a minute, or you can explore and try to find the level's 6 hidden gems, which each require platforming or puzzle solving. The game's 16 levels still have to be completed in order, making it the most linear Crash game at that point, and returning to previous levels requires walking to them rather than warping. I think it was supposed to feel like Jak and Daxter, but this method of progression, getting around and trying to backtrack, only serves to frustrate the player beyond reason. You know those side-scrolling crate-breaking puzzles from the older Crash games? Well, those are still here, but in completely 3D environments with mostly free control over the camera. I say mostly because the camera still likes to move on its own a lot and get you killed. It is so hard to control Crash in the air, and it doesn't help that his shadow does not appear on many platforms. I have really bad depth perception in games, and have come to rely on shadows to figure out where my character resides spatially. Over half of my deaths in this game were from jumps that I misjudged as a result of not having a shadow. And if you get game over, you have to start the whole level over again, and all the gems you collected since entering are reset. This was the most aggravating game I'd played in this series since the original Crash 1. But it didn't have to be. The two biggest flaws of this game are the platforming, which kinda kills the whole experience, and...
It is I, Aku Aku. What have I got? It is I, Aku Aku. What have I got? It is I, Aku Aku.
For some reason, the cutscene flags never turn off. Every time you die, you have to re-watch the cutscenes. Every time you return to a level, the cutscenes replay. If you get game over, you return to the start of these long-ass levels and must re-watch all the cutscenes again. Since you can't warp around, you must retraverse levels to get back to where you started, which means re-watching more cutscenes every time you miss a jump, every time you crash in the snowboarding levels, and every time you touch Nitro because Aku Aku's invincibility doesn't protect you from it. You watch the cutscenes and none of them are skippable. Man, I'm not off to a good start, am I? Let's back up a bit. So, Twinsanity. Very different from the other games, but you've still got the spinning, jumping, and crate breaking that makes it a Crash game. But what's odd is that even though there are gems to collect, breaking crates is not a requirement for them. There is no box counter, and all the gems are gotten by just touching them, if you want. The gems are totally optional this time. There is no true ending to unlock by getting them all. All gems do is unlock concept art, storyboards, rewatchable cutscenes, pass, and a secret bonus movie for getting 100%. But it's just a gag. There's no story content in it. And the art style in this concept art is kind of weird, don't you think? It sort of reminds me of Jersey Devil's art style, only not as good. Speaking of story, the plot this time is that Cortex has returned 3 years after the ending of Wrath of Cortex, where he and Uka Uka were left stranded in the Arctic. It begins with Cortex incapacitating Coco so that he can disguise himself as her, by dressing in drag and speaking in an awful falsetto voice. And Crash buys it. Okay, that I can believe, but Cortex, you had a clear shot at Coco and you didn't use it to just kill her. Evil genius my ass. After following Cortex into the woods, he walks right into his trap, where all of Crash's enemies have been summoned to get their revenge. Crunch is here too, but it looks like he was told that it was Crash's birthday and has no idea what's going on. Also, Polar? Why are you looking at me like that? Is this because we completely left you and Pura out of the last 2 games? Well, stop sucking so much. This is also Pinstripe and Koala Kong's first canon appearance in the series since Crash 1. It's also their last. Seriously, what are you guys even doing here? After the epic first boss, well, as epic as it can be having to listen to the dialogue again every time you die, Crash and Cortex fall into a cave and the others just presume them dead and go off on their own. Cortex loses his composure and starts trying to beat the crap out of Crash with his own hands. And this is an actual level. Forget Atmospheres, I want to roll around in a ball of pain. By now, you're probably seeing the sort of tone this game has.
Hey! Yeah, you! I've been doing this for 10 stinking years. Back and forward, and I'm sick of it! Well, I'm not gonna do it no more!
Apparently, the developers of Crash have always considered him a very wacky, cartoony character, like an unofficial Looney Tune. I can't say I've ever seen the resemblance. Maybe if he held up more signs? The whole game is themed around Cortex being hurt in various ways, whenever other batshit crazy nonsense isn't happening. It can really feel like some kind of drug trip half the time, and there are a lot of fourth wall jokes.
The check bounced. Are you sure? Well, the past few years have kind of been slow. Wrath of Cortex didn't do as well as we'd hoped, and... Fish?
So after rolling around for a while, Crash and Cortex stumble upon a power crystal, and for some reason, both of them start obsessing over it. It's explained that these things have a previously unstated mimetic effect that causes anyone who looks at them to go
Crystal crazy!
And this is where the game's famous joint gameplay comes in, where Crash and Cortex refuse to let go of the crystal. Crash can use Cortex as a flail, a hammer, and throw him across gaps so he can pull levers. You can't control Cortex directly during these parts, so you have to carefully escort him through the level. Bugs and Taz Time Busters executed the single-player co-op idea much more effectively. So, after escaping the mines, being chased by a honey-hungry honey bear, hung as a sacrifice by Papu Papu's tribesmen, it's really cool that you can explore his house from Crash 1 here, and being chased down the river, you finally complete the first hub and come face to face with the game's real plot. All that shit we just did was basically a tutorial. 2 evil space parrot twins show up and threaten to destroy the Wampa Islands. The evil twins appear completely omnipotent, being able to bring inanimate objects to life, speed up time, and warp between dimensions at will. They're even capable of defeating Aku and Uka, who are basically gods. That's how powerful they are. As a joke, they even let slip that they have tons of treasure, and every time anyone hears about it, they stop whatever they were doing and selfishly pursue it. Dingodile, N-Jin, N-Brio, N-Tropy, everyone is so out of character in this game. I was really hoping everyone's obsession with treasure would eventually be explained by them all being
crystal crazy!
But turns out it was all just a huge setup for a Spyro joke at the end. The treasure is just there as motivation for you to have admittedly epic boss fights against them all. Speaking of being out of character, Aku Aku suggests at one point sacrificing Cortex to the evil twins so that the rest of them might be spared. That doesn't sound very lawful good, Aku. I think teaming up with Uka is a bad influence on you.
An evil greater than even yours threatens to destroy this world. No! That's my job!
So after Crash and Cortex formally team up, their plan is to build a machine that will take them to the evil twins' base in the 10th dimension. But to do so, they'll need more power crystals. And Jin has one, and to get to him quickly, Crash comes up with a plan of his own. These snow sliding levels are fucking crazy, and I don't mean thematically. If you miss one of the gems, which is extremely easy to do, you have to kill yourself to try again. Run out of lives, and you have to recollect the gems you had already obtained. Reach the end, and the only way to return to the top is to walk there. Some of these jumps are nearly impossible. How am I supposed to get in this tunnel consistently with all these explosives in the way? And getting through these hoops requires absolute perfection. Also on one of these levels is...
Ladies? Excuse me, madam.
It's a brothel. Cortex has a brothel hidden in the mountains. And Tana works there.
Are those real?
Oh, and in case your mind hasn't been shattered enough already, guess who else works there?
Mother?
Hi, Sharon. Okay, let's all pretend none of that happened. So you get to Engine's warship, and for some reason, he's not talking anymore. He spoke plenty in the first boss, but he doesn't make a peep now. He also gets another boss fight of his own, but it's lame. And then Rhoda from Sonic Set AM chases you. And then you get a cool fight with Entropy and Embryo at the same time. This stuff all happens in a row, by the way, with no breaks in between. After getting the crystals, Coco finally shows up again. We haven't seen her since the opening FMV, and it's the halfway point of the game. In an attempt to get revenge on Cortex, she screws everything up by accidentally breaking the machine. And then she gets paralyzed again. For the rest of the game. This game treats Coco like shit. With the machine destroyed, Cortex admits that the only one who knows how to fix it is his niece, Nina Cortex. So they have to go get her from Madame Amberly's Academy of Evil, which is a school where people and monsters go to learn how to be evil. Embryo, Engine, and Cortex all went here as kids, so it's like in Kim Possible, where being evil is some kind of business.
Have you any previous evil experience?
No, but I'm a self-starter, and I have a law degree.
Close enough.
When you meet Nina, you actually get to play as her for a level, and she has some really cool and unique mechanics. Her bionic arms can stretch out to kill enemies and break boxes, and also latch onto things like a hookshot. But there are times when this thing can be horribly inconsistent. The hardest part of the final boss is just getting her shots to fucking land. After you finally get past her phase, the other two phases are disappointingly easy by comparison. But as for Nina, she's not fully represented in this game. She doesn't make a peep, her expression never changes, and she never has a distinct reaction to any situation. Also, she has... You know, I very frequently wonder how decisions to make something sexy are made when dealing with a full dev team. I know both men and women worked in this game, and I have to know whether or not anyone was opposed to this, or this. How much arguing or awkwardness is there behind the scenes whenever someone decides to put Pantsu in a kid's game? I'm genuinely curious. But after playing as Nina for a while and also finally getting to play as Cortex solo for a bit, you come face to face with the school's headmistress, Madame Amberly herself. I have no idea why she is here, or why she's decided to hamper Cortex's progress. I think she just likes antagonizing her students.
I see you found employment as a barber.
I'm an evil scientist.
A scientist, Harvey. To me, you'll always be a little verb.
Also, she's a cyborg too? Is every single evil human in this world a cyborg in some way? Nina has bionic hands, and Tropy is almost entirely machine, and Jin has that missile and distorted voice, and Trance is just an egg with a robotic body, and Brio has those Frankenstein bolts, and even Cortex has that N on his forehead, which seems to change shape with age. Maybe it's symbolic. Like, being evil requires you to sacrifice part of what makes you human. Nah, that's too profound for this series. Anyway, after you beat one of the series' only 3 female antagonists and run off with the other one, you return to Cortex's base and complete the portal to
A new dimension! It should have been 2 new dimensions, but we ran out of time.
You never, ever admit that you ran out of time and had to rush the game to completion. That is like giving your own game a death sentence. You've just admitted that the game is incomplete, but that you stored it in stores anyway. Why is this line even here? Some kind of self-aware joke/apology for all the promised content that's missing? Coco was supposed to be playable in this game, you know. And Nina, one of the game's tritagonists, only gets 1 level. So the 10th dimension is basically just an evil version of the first dimension. Or whichever dimension Crash comes from. I don't think it's said. There's an evil Crash here who briefly kidnaps Nina and chases Cortex around for a bit.
My daughter, niece!
Ignoring, and there was supposed to be Dark Coco too, but she was cut just like all of Coco's other involvements. Fight your way to the evil twin stronghold, beat them in the 3-phase final boss I already talked about, and bam, they're defeated. Somehow. Where did all of their omnipotence go? Forget it, moving on. Back home, Cortex turns on Crash, predictably, and tries to banish him to another dimension, but accidentally shrinks himself and gets teleported into Crash's brain? Mind? I don't know, where a bunch of Crashes are doing the Crash dance. And it's here I realized that this is the first time he's done the dance since the end credits of CTR. And the last time he'd do so until the Insane Trilogy. This game makes no sense. But I don't think it was really supposed to. It's supposed to be wacky and insane and off-the-rails crazy, and it definitely succeeded at that. It could have been a hilarious trip if not for all the terrible platforming, poorly flagged cutscenes, unreasonably cruel punishments for death, and crooked plot progression. And I haven't even told you all the really bad parts yet. Every time you fall from a high height, you automatically do a belly flop and have to wait to get up. You have to get used to spinning at the end of your falls to keep that from happening. There are these really bad ball physics that you have to get good at to acquire some of the gems, including this unbelievably frustrating one that took me hours to do. It's probably the hardest gem to get in the whole game. Luckily, there's cheese if you don't want to do it legit. But I did it both ways just to make my point. So many cutscenes are severely lacking in sound effects, and it's really noticeable.
Rio, get changed.
I mean, is it so hard to throw in a few stock sounds? Look.
Rio, get changed.
There, that took me like 10 minutes. If you get far enough into a level to get a gem, then you cannot go back the way you came. Look how the platforms here just arbitrarily disappear when I try to go back, just to cover up the developer's shoddy event flagging. Now I have to go through the entire level and even parts after that just to get back to where I originally was. But the worst part, the absolute worst and most disgusting thing that ever happened in this game is what can happen when you beat the second boss. When he's defeated, and the cutscene that follows ends, its lifeless stone body is just lying there, unmoving and unthreatening. In every other Crash game, when you beat a boss, you get the opportunity to bounce on or kick them around for funsies. What happens when you jump on the boss's inanimate corpse?
What have I got?
You're not imagining things. If you touch the dead boss, you die. The cutscenes replay, and you have to beat it again. That is inexcusable. This is the game's lowest point, so it only makes sense to jump to the opposite end of the scale and talk about its highest point. I would be horribly remiss if I didn't mention the soundtrack. By now, you've probably taken note of the music you've been hearing and asked yourself, what the hell is that? That, my friends, is the band Spyro, and they're an a cappella group. This game's music is comprised entirely of sounds made by the human mouth, with maybe some help from their hands. I've heard a cappella before, but never to this extreme level of professionalism. This soundtrack is godly, one of the best in the entire series. Many of these songs are covers of classical music pieces. And many of the original ones use a leitmotif of the game's main theme, and I love leitmotifs. Spyro Mouth's work on the game was so well received that they also did the next game's OST, so look forward to that. One last note before we end off is the voice acting. The voice acting is all great in this game, but the one actor who completely steals the show is that of Cortex. And no, I'm not talking about Clancy Brown. Nitro Kart was his last time doing the role. Instead, he is now voiced by Lex Lang, and has been the voice of Cortex ever since. Lang is notable for also having voiced Kenshiro from Fist of the North Star, Sanosuke from Rurouni Kenshin, and Krim from Dot Hack. But did you notice a difference? Even after beating the game, I didn't realize his VA was different until I was told. So why the change? Clancy Brown was available and wanted to reprise his role. Well, if rumors are to be believed, Clancy was turned down because they thought his take on Cortex sounded too mean. So you got someone who sounds exactly the same. Good call, guys.
He's an idiot. I don't even like him, let alone trust him.
There are people who love this game. People who think it's one of the best games ever made, a masterpiece. One fan in particular, who you should subscribe to like I did, is so devoted to this game that he is currently in the process of modding the Insane trilogy to play more like Twinsanity. That's how strong this game's fanbase is. There is a Mona Lisa to be had here. It's just missing the smile.
Oh, Crash. The farmer's market is tomorrow, and my wampa trees won't grow, for my orchard is riddled with greedy worms. If you rid my land of these pests, I'll give you this power crystal.
I'm an evil scientist. What do you expect? This isn't a game.
So many good ideas. So many awful ways to execute them. As mad as people might get, I have to give this game a 5 out of 10, which is more than fair as far as I'm concerned. And that concludes part 2 of Crash Bandicoot season. Hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, be sure to subscribe if you're not already and share this video with your friends. Until next time, I'll be here, in the darkness, quietly awaiting your return.